Hello, welcome back to Rejuvenated Women, Impeccable Health for High-Performing Women. Today, I'm very excited to be joined for the second time by my guest, Jennifer Helene Popken. If you missed our first interview, we had such a great conversation, we decided we just needed to have another one. But to reintroduce her to the show, Jennifer Helene has been seeking answers to attain optimal health for most of her life, I would say. She gleaned that there was more to optimal health than exercise and diet. As an entrepreneur, a mother, a former Ford model, a wheelchair-bound child, a finalist on MasterChef, writer and ghostwriter of many cookbooks, and a devoted yoga teacher and practitioner, Jennifer Helene has distilled key factors that contribute to optimal health mentally, physically, and spiritually, and has put it into a system that delivers results. She works with clients to reestablish their focus on whole life balance, freedom, and health, and really on creating behavior change. So Helene, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. So good to be here. I just feel so humbled, because I'm still just a student of all of this. I've been doing it for a long time and I've got some answers, which have helped me a lot and help my clients. But, boy, oh boy, there's so much still to learn.
There is. I feel like it's probably an unending journey. Like you, I've been on it for a long time and have a doctorate, and and I feel like there's still so much knowledge to be gleaned and things to experience and stuff to figure out depending on your phase of life too.
Totally, right? Like what I think is healthy today is different than what I thought 10 years ago or even 15 years ago. It's literally changing with every life stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited to dig into, when we connected before recording this, we talked about maybe diving into some of this hormone conversation and like how our hormones shift and change, because it's a journey I've been on recently, and I know you've had your own story with that. But to preface this for our listeners, I did a talk on weight loss couple of weeks ago, and in preparing for that, I googled just like how common are hormone imbalances in women, and a study that someone did found that 49% of women have hormonal imbalances, and of that 49%, 79% have absolutely no idea that that's what's going on with them. And so I thought that would be a really interesting place to start, because we can be so disconnected from ourselves, and so think that abnormal is normal because everyone experiencing it, but it's actually not normal.
Yeah, I also am really present to the frustration of a lot of clients and friends and family members who feel like they do everything right with their diet and their exercise, and they can't lose the weight.
Yeah.
And it's a really vicious cycle, because it's like, what am I doing wrong? And then it feeds into the whole like blame and shame. And not being able to shed the weight is tough on your ego, on your morale, on just in general. And it's like looking at the hormones is really tricky, because I don't think Western medicine, and correct me if I'm wrong, can really understand a hormonal imbalance. It's like we get our thyroid panel on our well check every year, and then unless it's like really off, they don't really have much to offer you. And then when it's really off, then they give you, Synthroid or, whatever you need. But Hashimoto's thyroiditis, hypothyroidism, and hyperthyroidism, if I'm even saying that correctly, are really, really rampant. And I have a lot of ideas about why that might be. But the bottom line is that people I know are not getting the information that they need. We don't know how to prevent this from happening because there's no information really that is viable. And then once we have it, what do we do about it? And the only system of medicine that I've had any success with is the Chinese medicine, acupuncture, electric, acupuncture, as well as Chinese herbs. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about, what you've observed with your clients and yourself in this. And I'm in the menopausal cycle, right? So I'm dealing with that and trying to stay kind of on top of the symptoms, kind of trying to prevent the symptoms. But, it's like navigating a bit in the dark, because, once your thyroid is off, you gotta figure it out. And there really isn't a lot of information out there.
Yeah, no, there's not. And by the time this episode releases, I did an interview with a woman who is known as the Thyroid Fixer, that anyone listening can go back and listen to that. It should be a few episodes before this one comes out. But It's very complicated. And I think you're really right. Western medicine doesn't have a lot to offer. And it's not necessarily the fault of any doctor. I talked to so many women, and I've been one myself, that were like, it's just so frustrating when you go in, because they're like, oh, you're fine. And we're like, no, I have symptoms. Like, I don't feel right. Something's off. And yet we're told over and over again, that we're fine, because ranges are skewed and needed to have been changed like 20 years ago. But, they just keep arguing about it instead of ever doing anything with labs. And not only that, but what's really interesting about thyroid, and I learned this about myself, because I'm someone who, I have normal numbers, but I had symptoms of hypothyroidism. And hypo is a lot more common than hyper. I think like 90% of the population ends up being hypo, where your thyroid's underactive. But there's something called functional or subclinical hypothyroidism, where all your numbers are normal, but you have symptoms of it. And so you can actually, we could have like a whole long conversation about this, but your TSH can be normal, and that's usually the marker that they check. But if your body's not converting T4 to T3, which happens in your gut, then you can actually be hypo around the rest of your body. TSH is really only measuring what's going on in your brain in terms of thyroid hormone and stimulation. And so there's all this interesting stuff that happens. But what's really hard is, until you find someone who actually understands this stuff and can give you some guidance, it's a crapshoot, and you're usually left not feeling well and
Right.
wondering what's wrong with you.
There's it's like a downward spiral. So why do you think that the population is more that has hypothyroidism? Like, why do you think that is the case?
So in my research and my understanding, honestly, I think a lot of it is, like 98% of it could probably be chalked up to our lifestyle and diet. And it's not necessarily our fault. It's the things in our food. It's the lack of things in our food. I know you're a big plant person, so we could talk, jump into that, because food is one of the ways that you can heal that. It's like they started putting iodine in salt because we weren't getting enough iodine naturally, and you get that from things like seaweed and kelp and things that I know you were just drinking in your smoothie because we were talking about it. So we have to find ways to replenish that stuff naturally, but it's also like the processed foods we're eating and all of that. And it can be as well, a lot of heavy metals can impact your thyroid. And so when I look at, when I'm looking at like a picture of hormonal health in a female, I'm checking heavy metals, I'm checking thyroid, including free T3 and free T4, and also looking at the sex hormones, because a lot of times your sex hormones being off will impact your thyroid. And the final thing is stress. Stress will shut down the production of all of that. And I would argue that in our society today, especially with us as females, we are constantly just go, 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 whether it's
yeah
and
absolutely. And do you think that like the consumption of caffeinated beverages like coffee may also be causing some imbalance? I don't actually know, but I'm curious what you think about that.
yeah, I would argue yes. All you coffee drinkers are about to hate me. If you're in a place where you're relying, like, because if you look at, why do we use caffeine? Usually we're tired, we need it to get moving. For some of us, it's like the ritual of morning coffee. Like, I work with a lot of women, but it's about the experience of like that morning coffee and what that signifies and all of that. And so that's one thing. But typically we're using it because we aren't sleeping enough. We're pushing too hard. We need it to get going and get moving. And so all of those things plus caffeine is just wreaking havoc on all of our normal cycles.
Yeah, like most of the women I know, before they, get on the health train, are drinking cafe lattes until 2 p.m.
Yeah.
And it's also like an appetite suppressant. So they think that they're doing the right thing because you're drinking or eating less calories, and they'll have their big meal of the day, like around 3 or 4, and then they won't be hungry for dinner, but then they'll eat again like at 9:30 or 10, which isn't really ideal. But is there anything that you think about the cortisol that gets excreted and the kind of the adrenal fatigue that might lead to some kind of thyroid imbalance, or is that something totally different?
So not totally different. They're connected. I
Right?
have to look at, like, I don't know if you're familiar with, and for our listeners, I've talked about this some before, but maybe not in this much detail. So I'm glad you're here asking me questions to make me go into this. But we have what's known as the HPA Access. And what that is your hypothalamus, your pituitary, and your adrenals. And so those three things have to work together, and things like stress disrupts that. And so your pituitary is actually telling the thyroid to produce thyroid stimulating hormone or not. So it's part of this whole chain of events and things that happen. But adrenal, the concept of like adrenal fatigue, it's actually much more complicated than just our adrenals are overtaxed, because there's all these other layers that include like your brain and the rest of your body working together. And so cortisol, if it's too high, or being produced more than it should be, like we need some level of cortisol to just function normally. It's one of those things that we're supposed to have. But for a lot of us, if we never have the chance to de-escalate from whatever perception of stress we have going on in our lives, which we've all experienced,
Well said.
that, right? Like if we can't find the ways that our body will de-escalate and get out of that fight or flight kind of response mode, the cortisol stays high, and that'll end up affecting your sleep. If you're not sleeping well, or you're not waking up through the night or whatever, that actually keeps your cortisol up, and cortisol is supposed to drop at night. And a lot of things happen hormonally at night when you're in a deep sleep. And so for a lot of us, whether it's little kids, or we have a million things running through our heads, or we're just not making the time to get into bed, or we're staying up late watching TV or whatever it is, that starts to disrupt that whole process and wreak havoc on absolutely everything.
So big. I don't know about you, but I know a lot of women who don't sleep well.
Yes.
And the minute they take progesterone, it's like magic. They start to sleep well. And so, but I think it's more than that. So the thyroid disruption, I've also noticed, is aggravated, so to say, or maybe even caused. And this might be out of left field, through electromagnetic radiation.
Yes.
So, our computers, like right here, like I always try to wear a stone also at my thyroid. I don't know if it helps, but, I believe that, I don't know if it's true, but I feel like my thyroid, or our thyroids, are absorbing electromagnetic radiation. Is that possible? I don't know. But how could there be this significant increase in hypothyroidism, or, thyroid imbalances in general, and Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which apparently is an autoimmune disease,
Right.
in these recent years? Like, I didn't have a cell phone before like 2004, really,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm curious about your thoughts about that.
So, and this is something I actually haven't talked about much on the show, but that I absolutely, you know, let's just say this. There are people out there who will poo-poo the EMS and all that stuff, and there are people who
Yeah.
absolutely 100% are behind it. And ultimately,
I know.
I say it's about doing
Polarized.
your own research and
Yeah.
coming to your own understanding. But, things like having Wi-Fi on in your house at night and sleeping with your phone by your bed. And I'll be honest, I'm guilty. Like my phone is my alarm, so it's near-ish to where I am, but I put it far away, not that I have to, far enough away, and put it in airplane mode so that I have to get up and turn, off when the alarm goes off if I'm using
Yeah.
the alarm for the day. But
Mhm.
and I think it's becoming more and more well known. Like there's a lot of research that's been done just showing how electromagnetic fields and radiation affects us. And so it's from things like cell phone towers, and from airplanes, and from like everything. And we're constantly surrounded by electricity. So, like one of the best things you can do for that is get outside and be barefoot.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Love that whole grounding, science. But I mean, do you think it's directly affecting the thyroid?
I think it
I
can be.
know
Yeah.
it can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why, because it's the messenger, right? The thyroid is the messenger. So it's the one that's signaling everything, like your metabolism,
Yeah.
all of these things.
Yeah.
So you had said to me that so I run hypo, and I've been running hypo for years. And it was really disappointing when I found out. But some of the symptoms are difficulty losing weight.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the lethargic feeling that a lot of people who are hypo do. I don't have that kind of like slow to go. Um, I don't have the some of the sadness that can come with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do have like some level of like constipation, which is bizarre because I eat like a ton of fiber, like and like vegetables only. So I know that when my thyroid is kind of getting back on track, that I evacuate fully, like everything's fine. It doesn't mean I go for like days without it, but it's like, it's not as like a complete evacuation. So what are some of the other symptoms that you notice for hypothyroid conditions?
So, I mean, the big ones are like difficulty. I think the most noticeable, we'll put it that way, because I think a lot of women have a lot of the symptoms, but don't necessarily realize it. But the most
Mm-hmm.
noticeable is the difficulty losing weight. Like the most common question I get is, well, is it my thyroid? And it can be, but usually there's even more going on with that as well. But difficulty regulating body temperature. So, you're either
Oh, right. Cold
cold
all the
all the
time.
time.
Sure. Yeah.
So a
A
lot of
lot of
things
people I
go with
know.
homeostasis. You might like never be hungry. That's not normal. I've been talking with my mom about this a lot because she just like doesn't eat.
I kind of want to have that problem. I love to eat.
I know some
Oh
women do, but like, or not hungry for breakfast, and that can be
my God. Oh,
a
actually,
leptin
I'm
thing
not
too.
very, yeah,
But
I'm not very hungry for breakfast. That much I can relate
yeah,
to. Yeah. Mm.
yeah. So just metabolic things, but depression. And so I find a lot of women, we're labeled as like 1 in 4 women is on an antidepressant. And how much of that is actually depression and how much of it is that your hormones are not working right. I mean, a lot of it, that's what's
Wow. I mean, that's big. That's
happening.
really big. Okay.
Yeah.
So sadness, loss of appetite, especially in the morning,
Yeah.
um, weight gain and resistant to weight loss.
Yeah. Swings, that's another one.
What was the other one?
Mood swings.
Mood swings. It's tricky. I mean, these are symptoms of a lot of different things, right?
Yeah. And that's what's hard about it. I think Western medicine is so quick to compartmentalize everything. And so it's like, you have to be this classic textbook, whatever, ailment. But the reality is like all of this stuff works together. And so the reason why, if I'm going to look at thyroid, I don't just look at the thyroid is because there can be other, if you're really going to get to the root cause of what's going on and not just label it as, oh, I'm hypothyroid, so now I need XYZ. It's like, no, but how did you actually get there? Is it cortisol? Is it that you're another thing that actually we didn't talk about, this is more from Eastern medicine, but your throat chakra is right where your thyroid is. And so that has to do with communication. And so when I first became hypothyroid, hair falling out, that's another one. I just remember that because I went through that.
Right.
And also getting hoarse. So, my story about 4 years ago, I started getting hoarse at the end of my workday, after talking with patients all day long in my chiropractic practice. My hair was thinning and falling out. I have like really thick hair. If you're watching the video, there's a lot of this, right? And it was shedding like crazy. And I was exhausted like all the time. But I'd been in a marriage where I wasn't speaking my opinion or sharing my truth because it wasn't safe, because I never knew how that would land with somebody. And when you bottle your emotions and aren't expressing yourself, that can start to shut down the energy that's at the thyroid and put you into one of these states. So I find with a lot of women who've been through trauma or just consistently like focus on
Yeah.
everybody else, practice
Energetic.
and bottle in what they really need, it can start to affect your thyroid as well. And if we're talking about energy, obviously EMS and all that disrupt our energy, our natural energy flows as well. So all of that.
That's big. That's really, really big. I mean, all of us, I'm sure, on some level feel like it's not safe to speak our truth. And a lot of it is because we haven't also figured out how to communicate in a way that is mutually beneficial. And that
Yeah.
sounds like very like wordy, but I mean, when we think about it, we break it down. I'm angry about something. And instead of like smearing my anger on you, I can also take responsibility for why I'm angry. And I can communicate it in a way that's responsible. And
Yeah.
that's actually not easy to do. I
No.
remember when my marriage was falling apart, I was looking at like what I could do differently. And I started reading Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication.
Mm,
Phenomenal, phenomenal book. And
yeah.
it's about more, they say violent, but even the words you didn't call or why didn't you call is considered a violent statement, because anything that we say that puts the other person on the defense is going to be considered violent. right? So we want to be able to communicate in a way that's neither going to put someone on the defense or the offense, because that's what he considers to be violent. But I have to say, it was like one of the most valuable things to learn, because I had to get to the root of what need I had that wasn't getting met, not necessarily by the other person, because it's never the other person's job to get my needs met, and then how it made me feel. Again, not blaming that other person, but taking full ownership and responsibility for how I feel because of an unmet need, and then formulating a request. It is so hard.
It is.
So hard to do that, but it's really important that we all develop the thing. I mean, I call it emotional stamina. Like, we all develop the skill to be able to like figure out a way to unify the head and the heart, and then to be able to articulate from the heart in a way that's clear and not confrontational, and that's gonna like keep the energy clean without all the tanglements and conflicts. And I'm not saying that I can do it perfectly, but I do practice.
Yeah.
And I think that, like I always say, like, your daily practice is your strongest medicine. And I'd love to like learn more about what our daily practices are that help to nourish our thyroid and keep it in balance, and not have it like tip over into hypo too much, because that's what happens. It's like this balance. Like, I know one of my clients is she oscillates between hypo and hyper, and she has to get her blood checked by the endocrinologist every 3 months to kind of adjust her medication. And she's on medication for the rest of her life. She can't undo that. And it's really unfortunate, because she also was diagnosed with cancer really young, because she's on these synthetic hormones, these synthetic estrogens. And so, I mean, it's such a double-edged sword. And I'd love to learn from you and share with you some of the things that I do, and see how we can nourish ourselves even more deeply to create balance.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, and I'm a big proponent of, like, here's what I'll say, it just to like talk about the medication piece for a minute, because typically thyroid hormone imbalances, any of those things, at some point, like they just kind of let you slide until you're so bad in order to really feel better, you're gonna probably end up on medication. And it becomes it doesn't have to be forever. I'll just say that. And I talk to so many women who are like, can I get off of this thing? And I'm like, legally, I can't
Yeah.
advise you about that at all. But here's what we can do to help your body, support your body to start producing this stuff naturally again. And then you can work with your medical doctor on that, because that's just not in my scope of practice. We'll put it that way. But um there's a time and a place for it. So like, if you're so symptomatic and so bad and you just need to start feeling better, like in order to function, that's a time and a place to take the medication. It's okay. And then you can take the
Right.
things that we're about to talk about and start to help support your body naturally. But it takes time to do it the way that I do it and the way that you do it. It's not an overnight fix by any means.
It
But
does take time. I
yeah,
mean, it can take 6 months, it can take a year, it can take a long time.
yeah. And we're
After I had a traumatic event, I mean, I was taking, adrenal support. It made a huge difference for me. But there was a time when I didn't need it. I'm sorry, what you were saying?
no, I forgot. It's okay. No, I
Oh,
was
I'm
gonna say, and
sorry.
on some level, we're still figuring it out, right? Like I'm still on my journey, and as I learn stuff, I come and share with everybody who listens to the show and works with me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, because even as I age, it's really changing.
mhm.
Especially now that I'm in like the menopause thing. It's like, so I'm kind of excited actually. I'm like, oh, like, what's gonna happen? Like, I want to do this asymptomatic. And I'm like,
Yeah,
but if I get the symptoms, I'm like super excited to like figure it out.
yeah. I've
But
had
I'm one of those
some,
people, I don't think PMS is normal. Like, I don't think
not,
that, I think
not
that's a sign that things are out of balance. And it's like, how can we tune into our bodies so we can read what it is they're telling us?
yes. And it's so frustrating because we've normalized so many things, especially around women's health. I mean, we do it with a lot of things, but it's not normal. Like, having symptoms is not normal. Your breast being sore and, being super moody or nauseous, or like, none of that stuff is normal. And same with menopause. I've had several conversations with, experts in the menopause field on the show as well. And I'll put links to that in the show notes if any of you are interested in and haven't heard those. But like, menopause can be this really empowering experience where you're kind of like coming into this, being a master and like just there's some cool stuff that happens, but we've normalized all the crazy that can go with it, except it's not normal. It's just a sign that your body's off and out of whack. Um,
Mm.
and so it is possible to, and if anyone can do it, I would say it would be you. Just with lifestyle and with being really intentional of like having a great menopause experience and not going crazy.
No, yeah, because I mean, I've heard some, terrible stories, and guys go through it too. It's called andropause, right? So it's not
Yeah.
exclusive to women, but we don't even talk about that, let alone normalize it.
Right.
But yeah, so what are you doing to help? Because you said you had lost a lot of weight recently.
Yeah.
When you started to look at the underlying hormonal influence, I'm really curious to hear about what it is you did. What did you do?
Yeah. So, well, first I checked my blood or checked my levels. It wasn't all blood tests.
Blood never lies. I mean,
Yeah,
that's smart. Yeah.
do some labs on myself. I'm like, okay, I do this for other people. Maybe it's time to do it for myself. And so I figured out that I was functional hypothyroid, which meant, my levels are normal, but I still had symptoms. And then I'd gone estrogen dominant, which was caused by stress for a long term. But, that starts to lead to things like PMS. And I wasn't, it can head towards PCOS. I wasn't quite at that level, but that was where my weight issue came from, where I just kept packing on like 10 pounds a year. And I mean, I'm 5'4" and I topped out at 182 when I started my process in March, which just, yeah, we're just going to leave that there. So I'm down to, I'm down to 162. I've still got about 25 pounds I'd like to lose to, feel, to be at where I know I feel my best and function well. My body's really healthy. And so I'm still working on that, and that's all great. But what I did, and I didn't exercise and I didn't cut calories. Those are the two things that we go to that, and you mentioned, I think when we started talking something about, you know, with caffeine and kind of worrying about, using it as a suppressant. If you suppress your appetite too much, you actually increase your stress response and cause your body to store fat because it thinks that it's starving. It's not sure where the next meal is coming from because you don't
Yeah.
have enough calories. And I meet so
Yeah.
many women, we're eating somewhere between 1,000 to 1,200 calories a day, and it's not enough. And your body thinks you're
Mm.
starving and you need to eat food.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so that's one thing, is eating food, but then it's eating the right stuff. And so, I did a
Mm.
lot to put my body into fat burning mode, largely by eating vegetables. It's not keto. I'm so tired of the keto phase or fad. But it is eating in a way to get your body into ketosis. And so that means, getting it to where it burns fat. But for women, and for it actually can look like eating more carbohydrates than what traditional keto would say. Because when I would try to go super low, I would stop losing weight. And when I allowed myself, carbs from vegetables, not, we're not eating breads and pastas and that kind of stuff, but like some zucchini or some sweet potato or whatnot, I would start the fat burning process again.
This
And
is
so,
really interesting.
yeah. And on top of that, I did use some supplementation. I'm not a proponent of using supplements like medication, as I think it's really common to do now. It's like, you can either take your medication for symptoms or take your supplement for symptoms, but you're still not really dealing with the underlying problem. So, um,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
said, sometimes our body needs some extra support. So I did use, it's called I3C, which is something that helps the liver metabolize estrogen and can start decreasing your levels. And then for thyroid, I use antioxidants. So things like selenium, and I have
Hmm.
an HPA Access supplement that supports that whole, triangle that
Pathway.
we talked about earlier. And then honestly, the biggest thing I did was completely change my work environment so I'm no longer stressed. Uh,
Oh,
I
that's
moved to, I
beautiful.
let go of my office space. I moved to being completely working out of my home, only working 2 days a week. And I realized not everyone is in a position where they can do that. And, that was unique to me. But sometimes it takes having a really hard look at where are your sources of stress, and what do you really need to do in order to get yourself to a place of being healthy, because it's important. And
So stress, supplementation, and then a high
it
plant ketogenic diet.
Yeah. And I still eat meat. I know you are totally plant-based, so we can talk about kind of the variances with that stuff. But
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask real quick about, because you said you had too much estrogen when you did the functional blood work.
mhm.
And then the supplement you took was for your liver, and it increased your estrogen. So can you
It
help
didn't
me
increase
understand?
it. It increased metabolizing it. So when
Oh,
our
okay, got it,
body,
got it.
yeah, when our body produces estrogen, we have to get rid of stuff. And this brings up a point because you talked earlier about constipation. And I see this with so many people, and it causes hormone imbalances because if our liver is sluggish, which 60% of the population it is, even if you eat really
Mhm.
clean and all this stuff, it still can be. We
Mhm.
can't get rid of the toxins. We can't get rid of the junk. We can't get rid of the estrogen
Mhm.
metabolites, which if you have too many of those, you end up with breast cancer and stuff like that, especially
It's
depending.
on every cancer cell,
Yeah.
estrogen
And
precursors.
there's two different pathways that estrogen is metabolized in the body, and one of them is more common to cause cancer than the other. I'm not in the cancer causing one, which is good, but working with women that are, we have to make sure that that process is happening. But that means you're having 2 to 3 normal bowel movements a day is a healthy liver.
Right. And I'm like, I only have one.
Yeah.
And so there's estrogen, estriol, and estrogen, right? So, and not all three are, they're different, right? These three
Mhm.
different types of estrogen.
I think there's four actually. Yeah.
There's four.
Yeah. And so estradiol E2 is the
Estrogen.
most common. Um, and typically, if we're going to see issues, we see it there. And then in the ratio. And so you can have, just getting into the nitty gritty of this, like progesterone and estrogen have both have their levels and they fluctuate throughout the month depending on where we are in our cycle. And they don't go away when you go through menopause. They just lower, but you
Mm-hmm.
still have to have the proper ratios of them. So you can have symptoms of estrogen dominance, but it's
Mm-hmm.
because your estrogen or your progesterone is too low. And so that
Mm-hmm.
ratio is skewed. And so you're having the same symptoms of PMS and you can't lose weight and all of that stuff. But it's not
You
because
can't
estrogen is
sleep.
high, it's because progesterone's low. And
Yeah.
yeah, and so
I've
vice versa.
I have a really good friend, and I want to talk about keto in a minute, and liver,
Mhm.
and sluggishness, and fat, and toxins getting in and out of this, and nutrients getting in and toxins getting out. But before I go there, I wanted to mention. So I have a good friend and colleague who's a doctor. He's an endocrinologist and a surgeon. So he actually has two medical degrees, one from Harvard and the other from Hopkins. And he just happens to be Chinese. So he grew up in China learning about, the Chinese medical system as well. So just a really amazing man.
Yeah.
And his whole life has been dedicated to medicine. And he's ended up as an endocrinologist as a result because he sees a lot of the cancers he was, surgically removing could be prevented from, endocrine balance. And I bring him up only because I've spent a lot of time with him, and he says that this progesterone, oftentimes women just need a little bit of progesterone. It's very specific though about when they take it, which days of their cycle or which days of the month, just like you mentioned. But it helps so much. It can at least help so much. The progesterone cream. I don't know if you're a supporter of that kind of treatment, but it's just
Definitely.
wonderful to hear the stories of these
Yeah.
women who have been helped. But going back to keto, yeah. So I was diagnosed with pre-diabetes a few years ago. I think it was now like 7 or 8 years ago. And I was totally shocked. I'm like, what? How could I possibly have diabetes or pre-diabetes? And I was freaking out. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to fix this. So I went to my doctor. He said, you should eat paleo. So I went on like one of those hardcore paleo diets, and I was like, really into it. Didn't really like the smell of my body, like, and I didn't feel that great, but I was like, go for it. My colon was even more sluggish. And I went back to get tested 6 months later, still same numbers. I thought, how is this possible? And then I was like, okay, I'm going to go raw vegan. And then I did that for 6 months, went back, numbers were still the same. And then I'm like, all right, I'm cutting out fruit, no grains, no fruit, just raw vegan. And I did that for like 6 months. And numbers were getting worse. And I'm like freaking out. So I go to my friend who's a registered nurse. He's helped thousands and thousands of people. He's a cancer survivor
Mhm.
or thriver. Anyway, so he's like, oh, and so we were talking, he knows me really well. He's like, you should just really start eating breakfast. And I'm like, what? what? That's against natural hygiene. And I'm not hungry for breakfast. And I'm not going to eat breakfast. And I was like, he's like, do you want your numbers to change or not? He's like, I don't know who you're fighting with here because it's not me. Anyway, another 6 months went by, numbers weren't getting better. And I was like, damn it, Tom, I'm just going to eat breakfast, So I did. And lo and behold, the numbers got better. But that little journey, indicated to me a few things because I really went hardcore on in a lot of different directions, fasting and I'd been hardcore for a long, long time.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed was that myself and also my clients over the years, when they do the keto, traditional keto with the high fat, high meat, which I think is great if you're epileptic.
Mm-hmm.
But for us, and people love it. They love the way they feel. They love the way their brain works. But what I notice is it's a little bit of a vicious cycle. There's like this moment where usually about 4 or 5 months into it, where I start to see like dark circles under the eyes, and which indicates to me a sluggish liver or liver struggling. And then you've got stagnation in the colon because there isn't really enough fiber for like the good bugs to live on. And hey, I'm not a medical professional. I'm less qualified than you are. But this is just things I've noticed like anecdotally. And then like you see endocrine imbalances start to ensue.
Yeah.
And that's when people start to get themselves into trouble. And this paleo and keto trends, I think, are, maybe one of the causes actually of all these endocrine imbalances. I don't know, but would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, and you bring up several really interesting points. One of them being you can be doing all the right things and still have problems, right? Because there's a lack of like our full understanding of things like leptin balance and how our liver's functioning. And you can be eating super healthy and still develop issues. Like I was eating clean and doing all the things I knew to do for the last like 3 years and what I did with women and still packing on the weight and I couldn't figure it out. And it's so frustrating. So that's number one. So if you're listening to this and you're feeling frustrated, like, no, you're not alone. We've all been there. And what I'll say about, I think with any of I'm so tired of the fad diet thing. Like ultimately it comes down to, we have to figure out what our bodies actually
Respond to.
need and tell us what we need, and that requires tuning into our digestive process and how we eat and all of those things on a much more deeper level than any of us ever do, because I think we're mindlessly eating so much. Like we're eating in the car, on the run. Like, I'm completely guilty of this too. We're skipping
Me
meals.
too.
We're doing all this stuff, and until you can really like slow it down long enough to tune in to like, how does that actually make me feel? Why am I wanting this thing? What's driving my decisions around food? This is something I've started talking a lot about, is our food dialogue.
Oh, it's so emotional. It's such a
It
deep
is. It's so
relationship.
emotionally driven. And you brought up earlier and just talking about thyroid stuff, like needs not being met. And so a lot of times our food decisions are driven by some need that is not being met that we can meet with something other than food. And it's just about figuring out what that is. Not to say we never need to eat, but I think it's really interesting because so much has become keto, and there's keto ice cream and keto chips and keto this, keto that.
Yeah.
You don't need to be eating it, period. And just because it says it's keto, just like gluten-free became this thing that you can have plenty of stuff that's super unhealthy being gluten-free. It's become this new like fad, like, oh, I'm keto. And that's not how it works. Like ultimately you need to eat real food. So it's like taking Whole30 and turning it into a way that is fat burning, but you're still eating a lot of, like, I eat so many more and I already ate vegetables, but I eat so many more now, just through the process I went through. And like, that's my biggest portion. And that's like, I feel good and I have energy. And, I'm not necessarily an advocate of like, I'm neither way. Like my body does better with meat. I've tried to go vegan before and it was like the worst period of my life. So
I'm so sorry to hear that.
I tried it for 2 weeks before my wedding and I was like, yeah, and no, I need some steak. And like, it's just learning that that's how, I don't need lots of it. It's not
right.
able, but it's like knowing that my body, hey, we need some more protein than what you're giving me. And so, yeah. And I do think the other thing is like being in ketosis, you know, everyone will argue, oh, you can do it as long as you want and blah, blah, blah. I would actually argue that, you know, if you're staying there more than 4 to 6 weeks, you're going to start to develop problems like what you talked
That's what
about.
I
You
noticed
have
with
to
my
have some
clients.
variety and, you know, give the body a break because it's another form of stress to eat limitedly like that.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think that for all of us, one of the big takeaways is like the biggest portion on your plate, you know, is vegetables. And that's really what my plate looks like, you know, literally for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And if you don't like vegetables, you got to find ways to love them because they love you back.
Yeah. And if you just heard
And
her say eat vegetables for breakfast, that is correct.
yeah,
It's so good.
it's so good. I eat like squash for breakfast. I eat some, you know, greens for breakfast. Sometimes I have roasted mushrooms for breakfast. There's so many ways you can fit greens and veggies into your breakfast that are really delicious. And you can even make like a porridge out of the squash with cinnamon and you can make it sweet, without sugar, of course. But I mean, I
Yeah.
think this goes back to lifestyle practices of like tenderly loving yourself, accepting yourself, learning how to communicate honestly and lovingly to yourself and others. Right. And
Yeah.
then at least this is what I'm like gathering, right?
Yeah.
I'm very practical. I like to like find practical applications. Like, what do I do with this? And stick with this, whole food, plant-based, for me, plant-based, but primary, like lots of vegetables, diet. And also alcohol
Mhm.
is a thing that I think a lot of adults are consuming. And I find that is needing to stay off the table or become more of an occasional thing for most people. I
Yeah.
personally don't drink, but I see a lot of people aging poorly, running their health into the ground, and it causing massive sleep disturbances.
Yeah.
And so when we think about what we need to leave off the table, flour, refined carbohydrates, sugars, and alcohol, I think it's really, really, really important. Would you agree?
I would. And I mean, the biggest thing with alcohol is it breaks down to sugar. So, and all of those things you just listed also break down to sugar. And we have sugar. Like if you just, if for fun, you can take this on if you want to, listening. But if you look at the labels on all the food that you eat, and there's actually 65 names for sugar. And I'll maybe put a link to a document that people can download to look at that. But just look at how much sugar we consume on a daily basis. And then, and the average American, I think it's 150 pounds of sugar a year is
Mm,
how much we
that
eat.
is
That's not like
massive.
having dessert every night. That's just like in our food. They add it to absolutely everything. And so we've developed this, our taste buds crave it, and we have this little sugar monster going on, and it really stresses out our liver and leads to things like insulin resistance, which then, is setting you up and heading you on the way towards diabetes, which
And
is
high
the
fat, high
fastest
fat
way.
is doing something similar, right?
Yeah.
High fat is leading to insulin resistance too. Do you
Yeah.
find that?
I would agree with that. And I know you had an interesting thing about fat, so we can maybe dive into that,
Transition.
and then we'll wrap this up
I
because
know
we
there's
could talk for
so much
hours.
to unpack. I love this conversation. It's really, really rich and juicy and information that we just can't get anywhere else.
Yeah.
So I love to share this and be in this conversation of like, hey, we're still figuring it out and some things we figured out. So I've always thought like you have to choose fat or sugar. You can't really have both. And so I never really felt confident choosing sugar, but at that time I didn't realize that vegetables were also sugar, that fruits were sugar, right? Of course, that's kind of more obvious, but I
Right.
wasn't really, I was thinking sugar was sugar, like, cane sugar, brown sugar, like things like that. And so for the longest time, I was like consuming a lot of fat. I mean, more than one avocado a day. Like I'd go through olive oil, like, more than one bottle a month. I was eating a
Yeah.
lot of fat and oil. And recently I've decided to reduce and even for certain days, like eliminate of the month, certain days of the month, just eliminate fat altogether. And I had this really rare, I had like eczema. Like, what? I don't eat corn, soy, dairy. Like, why would I have eczema? This is so bizarre. And I was kind of in denial about it. And it kept getting worse. And I went on like a trip, and I got a suntan, and like that area was like white because it was bad. I'm like, this is like a real legitimate case of eczema. And it was on the backs of my arms, which I relate to my liver.
Right.
And I thought, I wonder if something's going on with my liver. And I did like a liver cleanse that was completely against like everything that I know to be true. But I'm like, people are talking about this. I might as well give it a try. I'm always testing things on myself. And it was basically like a fat-free 9 days of no fat, and lots of greens, and, lots of, asparagus, and things that would be helping the liver. And I couldn't believe it. Like, it completely lifted off and it went away completely. And it was like a high sugar, no fat kind of thing. And I don't mean like, there was some honey, and there was like fruit, there was like orange juice, like in a salad dressing or something, but it was a lot of green. There was a lot of greens. And what I find is that the more fat that I eat, it feels like it's slowing down. There's like a sluggishness, because we did like live blood analysis in a colleague of mine's office, and it showed like when we eat high fat foods that there's like a coagulation of the blood, and it's like really kind of dense, similar to what happens like when we eat processed foods, or even high protein foods that are animal based. Like you find this like, and then this coagulation, and then like when you eat foods that have a lot of oxygen and phytonutrients, like you find that the blood cells are like floating more freely. And it led me to like understand this microcirculation of like, nutrients being able to get into the cell, and then toxins being able to leave the cell. And when you eat a high protein, high animal protein, high fat diet, it appears that the cell is not as able to receive nutrients and excrete toxins. And I'm happy for you to refute any of this, but this has just been like my understanding of what I've like unveiled. And so when I can eat less oil, I feel better. And this not sciatica, this eczema thing was really, really like made it clear to me, like undeniably, like, oh my gosh, could it be that simple? Because I had this ideology that I could eat as much fat as I wanted. And it, especially if I wasn't eating sugar, and that was going to work. And actually that's not true anymore for me.
It's so interesting. And it's I don't want to confuse anybody either, because there has been evidence that showed, like, I found some women aren't eating enough, and we can get into, there's a ratio here that we can talk about in just a second, but
Yeah, I
you
agree
know
with that statement. I agree with
fat,
that statement.
yeah, like we need fat,
We do.
but maybe we don't need as much as we start, because I went into that realm too of, I was eating like a ton of fat, and I was then like, maybe I should back off on this a little bit. Like I actually tracked my macronutrients for a while, and I was like, like 60% of my diet is fat. That's probably not good.
I
Um,
completely agree with you.
yeah,
The middle road is exactly where I am today, day to day. The other that I was describing was like the extreme that got
right.
the skin problem to go away
And you
and
need
help
more
my
of that
liver.
probably. Yeah. Um,
I guess I just need a little break. I think our liver loves green foods. Our liver loves deep orange, deep purple. Our liver loves like chlorophyll rich foods, like green, green, green. Makes me feel so good inside when I eat green foods.
Absolutely. Yeah. And and it needs, and we need variety too. That's what I was going to say. Like, if it's not about finding like the perfect stagnant diet, I've started talking more about the kind of ebbs and flows of, we need change and transition. And, there's different times to eat different ways, and you can do it seasonally, you can do different things, but,
I like seasonal. Yeah, that makes
yeah,
sense to me.
yeah, but we need that variety. And the last thing I wanted to add with this is, different types of fats. So we have omega-3s, omega-6s, omega-9s.
Thank you.
Um, and we tend to, as a society, especially in North America, where we eat high meat,
Omega 6.
our omega-6s are insanely high, and they are very
Yep.
inflammatory, and they are one of the primary things that causes heart disease and cancer. And so if you are, like my husband, a meat and potatoes guy, and woman, and doesn't care where the meat came from as long as it tastes good, like your numbers are going to be skewed big time. And so it's finding ways to support that omega-3. So I'm really a proponent.
Oh,
The healthy
yes.
fats are those that are higher in that omega-3s and have a lower ratio with the omega-3 to omega-6. But
pumpkin seeds, walnuts,
Yeah,
hemp seeds, flax seeds,
all of this.
like those. Yeah, I can go
Salmon is
on
another
more.
good one, as long as you're getting wild caught. And salmon's gotten a little iffy, and I live in Alaska, and I'm saying that, but
Sardines are supposed to be some of the best when you look at blood work. I've heard from
yeah,
some of my colleagues.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so I totally am so glad you brought that up. And another thing I really want to add, and I know we got to wrap, but herbicides, fungicides, pesticides cause estrogen imbalances. And so
yeah,
when we're eating our vegetables, either we need to grow them ourselves in our kitchens and homes, or out in our on our terraces or in our gardens if you have a garden, or find a farmer who chooses not to use genetically modified seeds and herbicides, fungicides, and pesticides on their farm. I mean, on their vegetables. It's
yeah.
really, 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 really important. And I don't think we mentioned that. And I really want to emphasize how essential it seems. So basic, but organic food, especially if you can find a farmer who mineralizes their soil, even better.
Yeah.
Or if you can, just we've got to find it. We've got to go out of our way to get it. Our health depends on it, our future health, because these hormone imbalances don't come overnight.
No.
They come over a long-term buildup of toxins, stress, and all kinds of other things. So, yeah, I just want to be sure to really mention that.
Yeah. And I would argue too, we're exposed to more and more now. And as a result of, like, 2020, the year we all want to forget. But, people were even more obsessed with, like, sanitizing everything and cleaning everything. And so what that does is, when it kills 99% of the stuff, it leaves the 1% that's truly, really virulent and bad and can wreak the most havoc on your body. And so, we're just in this, like, we don't have the, I guess, support of the critters that we need in our body because we're killing everything. And then we're inundated with all of this toxic stuff from our environment. And honestly, environmental stuff that we're exposed to, cleaning products and pesticides and herbicides and, stuff they spray around the house and stuff that you clean your car with, like, all of that ends up affecting our bodies. We could even include, I don't want to get into a vaccine conversation, but a lot of our reactions and developing allergies and asthma and hormone issues and all of that is actually tied to, like, our body's just inundated and it can't keep up with a normal immune response. And so we end up,
Yeah. So we've got to detox, get the toxins out of our bodies. We've got to like reverse any damage we've done by eating organic food, sweating, hydrating. These are all really, really, really important for me in my daily practice. And facilitating the cell, the membrane, keeping it malleable so that nutrients can get in and toxins can get out. And I will just plug broccoli sprouts for a sec, because broccoli sprouts are really key with the indole-3-carbinol and the sulforaphane, because we built up a lot of, estrogen mimicking plastics that a lot of our food, even if it's organic, is wrapped in. And the broccoli sprouts can help usher out some of the estrogen that we don't really need anymore. And I know I'm kind of not speaking in exactly correct terminology, but indole-3-carbinol and sulforaphane found in broccoli sprouts can really, really, really assist our bodies in its cleansing
yeah,
process and hormonal, balance, therefore.
yeah. And just to reiterate, indole-3-carbinol is what I've been taking for my estrogen dominance. But I will say, if you are not 100% that you're actually estrogen dominant versus that you have your progesterone's too low and that's causing signs of estrogen dominance, you do not take it without getting some. You can eat broccoli sprouts, that's fine, but don't take a supplement without, being really clear, because you can screw yourself up more that way.
Oh,
So,
wow, such a
caveat
delicate
there.
balance. But for all of us, like, there's hope, and and I'm so excited, that we can all come into balance and share and learn.
My son is interrupting us as we're ending here. So, Helene, just let
I
us
want
know
to play Fortnite with my best friend.
one more time. How can we get in touch with you, find out more about you, connect with you?
Well, you can go to jennifer-helene.com and sign up for the 7-day free lifestyle plan, which will help, to get back on track, to reboot your system and to start to find balance. And yeah, so that's a great way. You can contact me there, reach out to me, send me an email, and I'm, fully accessible. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming back and for another great conversation. We could talk literally all day, but we'll go
I
ahead.
know. I'm so excited. I'm also so excited to
No.
see. I'm so excited to see the results that you get and the program that you're developing on this, because it's really, really important.
Thank you.